meeting you right where you are on your foster care journey. This is the Forgotten Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Forgotten Podcast. I'm your host, Jami Kaeb, and I am so happy to be with you. If you are part of the foster care community, passionate about serving, or simply interested in learning more, we are here for you. In every episode of this podcast, you're going to hear from men and women who've experienced foster care to one degree or another. They may have grown up in the system, are caseworkers or foster parents, or other people who are here to bring you hope and encouragement. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe and share with a friend. Remember, you are not alone. I hope you enjoy the Forgotten Podcast. Well, Amanda, I just want to hear your story. I mean, you brought in a child who was not born to you and was not a foster placement. So how did this happen?
Well, foster and adoption had actually never been on my radar before. I'm not a person that felt like I was called to it or that was looking to or seeking to grow my family in that way. It was something that my husband and I had, growing up in the church, there's an awareness level of and feeling like you're caring for the orphans. And that's kind of a burden of a holy burden, right? A good burden in just the realm of possibility. But it was not something we were pursuing. We really wanted to have two kids. I grew up in a family of two girls. And so we were blessed when we were able to have two girls after kind of years of not sure what having kids would look like. And it came up on my Facebook feed that a relative had a child that we hadn't really known about. There was a couple tricky family situations, family dynamics in there that we were aware of some of it and not all of it. I think that's kind of how all families work. They're not going to air everything. And so it came about that we had heard there was a little girl that was related to our family. And so the first thing we felt like we were called to do is reach out and say, hey, what's going on here? Because she was nearly identical in age to our biological youngest at the time, 11 days older. And so,
wow.
Yes. In that season of life, we were the young married family that was hosting all of our family events. And so the first thing we did is we reached out on Facebook and we invited this child and her mother to family holidays. I think it was Thanksgiving. She first came over for them. We have pictures of it, her child and my child together. And then Christmas. And it came to be this relationship where we felt like, her mom was single parenting at the time and trying to find a good support system and trying to kind of break the old habits and even the generational stuff that was happening in her own family. And so we thought, okay, we can be there for that. We want to be available. And from the time we met her and we actually heard about the child, we thought, if this is something we need to be available for, we want to be available for it, whatever that looks like. And again, absolutely zero clue what was coming next and the reality of all of it. But we just knew in our hearts that we were going to kind of prepare to say yes. And so 6 months after the holidays came out of the blue in the summer, when we were asked to babysit overnight, we said yes. And then in the next following 2 weeks, when we were asked to babysit again overnight, we said yes. And we were about an hour away, drive time from where her mom lived. So it just became the situation where we thought we're going to continue to be this safe harbor. And it was a couple months of that babysitting on and off every other week and then once a week. And then finally we get the call that we thought we might get, which was, can you take her and keep her safe? I'm going through some stuff. And my husband, who's a musician, he tours hardly ever anymore. But of course he was gone. We actually laugh because of how many hard things in our life have happened when he's stuck on an airplane. And I called him and I said, hon, we just could tell this call was different. Whatever this looks like, this was the yes we were actually saying. And that began kind of our long journey in what's called kinship care, which we had never heard of before and we were unfamiliar with and completely unprepared for. But here we are 4 years later.
Wow. Okay, so how old was she at this time?
She was 14 months when she was dropped off to us initially. Well,
okay.
Yeah, left in our care.
And you said this already, but you had no training. You had no rule book. Like, how did you prepare for this? How'd you navigate adding a child to your home from a difficult situation when you were unprepared?
You know, the best thing about how God works in his community is that he sets up these road flags, signs on the way for you. And I didn't know that at the time, but the church we were heavily involved in and had a connection to a foster care agency, foster adopt agency, that was local, that we had been supporting, that one of the members actually worked at. This was a neighbor of ours that was involved and employed at the foster care agency. And she was really passionate. She had fostered to adopt her 2 daughters that came to church with us. And she had spoken a couple times, there's National Adoption Month. We kind of laid heavily into, she would be doing the announcements and she's kind of explaining how as a church, we're kind of partnering with them. And so we were familiar with a few things, and she became just for me this excellent resource of, instead of having the question mark hanging over my head, I was able to have someone I could text and call and say, is this normal? Is this right? What am I doing? So, again, that was set up in advance for us. But other than that, that was the first time I had ever even considered what it looked like to parent a child from trauma, what it looked like practically to apply that parenting now, not just to the new child, but to my other children. We actually went through a big season with my oldest, who was, when our daughter came to our family, she was 14 months, but my oldest was 4. And it sparked in her, it was like the bubble bursting, the realization that parents actually could leave and not come back. And the anxiety was crippling. And so it took me a while to notice, why is it she doesn't want to go to school? We homeschool and we go to a hybrid. So it's only 2 days a week. And I'm like, honey, come on. It's 2 days a week. Why can't we get it together? And the idea that I might not come back, she'd actually watched it happen. And so there's a new type of tenderness and grace. We're parenting all these kids from trauma now, not just the one that actually came from that tough situation. So, there was things we got caught up to speed on. One of the best things I did is start following these foster care adoption accounts, pouring into this woman of wisdom at our church community. We aligned ourselves also with that foster care organization because they did also work with kinship placements. And we just kind of tried to listen, tried to go with our gut. We met with a family therapist when we started going through a little bit of issues just with biological family and what it looked like to kind of step in and advocate and protect, especially when it's hard and when it's messy because the people you're advocating against then. And so we just kind of tried to tune in and seek the heart of the Father. But my goodness, when you don't have rules and boundaries, it is so messy, messy.
Wow. Let's get more practical, and then I do want to speak to more some of that advocating you were talking about. When she first came, how did your other children respond? Was it difficult at the beginning? Was it difficult more later on, like you said, after they started to realize that parents can sometimes not come back? Or how did that look?
I think that God did a really good thing in our family. Our kids were so secure. It was actually a blessing to see so many of the ways that their security came out. I remember when she was really little, I would hold her on my lap, and her name is Suri, our non-biological daughter. I would hold her on my lap, and if any of my other kids approached me, out of her fear, out of her insecurity, she would just take her leg and kick them away. And my biological daughter, who's 11 days younger, so same kind of toddler frustration age, would kind of just be like, what the heck? never really got angry. It was just okay, all right, well, that's okay. And we have actually seen how the Lord has tethered them together at the same age in such a beautiful way, because I feel like Rowan is all healing in so many ways. That security is just continuing to impress and rub off on her sister. And they've room shared, all my girls room share for the rest of their life, hopefully. I don't know, we'll see. But until the marital bed, I don't know. But we've been able to kind of strengthen their bonds by intentionally sticking them together. And, even when they're in kindergarten now and when their teachers ask, do you want them to be in different classes? I'm like, no, I kind of want them to have each other, because the tendency of some of these kids who have these big pasts and these big worries about what if this happens again is that they're going to climb into their shell and they're not going to know who or what is safe or who or what they need to impress in the room. And if I can just give her like that one little familiar face where she can be real, like if she's hurt on the playground or if she's, corrected and embarrassed, like I want her to have that little recognition moment of connection that she can have her fall apart people wherever she's at. And maybe that won't be the case when they're older, but for right now in these ages, we feel like, okay, this is a good fit for us. We're not going to force any separation. I mean, they're not twins. I wouldn't even say they're best friends. They're very different. But the idea that they have each other as the safety net has been so crucial.
Yeah, I love that. I love the fall apart people. That's a great term.
We
all need those people.
We get it all.
Yeah. I'm guessing she started calling you mom pretty quick. I mean, I know that when we fostered, our kids just kind of started because they heard all the other kids. Was there any conversation around that? Was there any challenge with that? How did that look?
The first thing we did when we struck up wise counsel with the family at our church was ask them, what do we do with this? What do we refer to ourselves as? Because at 14 months, when she came to us, she was just learning to walk and not really talking. So we kind of asked for guidance on that. And the one kind of piece of advice that has stuck with us that we've actually shared with people since who are in similar situations is she will heal. If she leaves your home, she'll heal from calling you mom and dad and going back to a biological situation. But she may never heal if she's in your home for a length of time and she has felt like a guest or intruder there.
Wow.
And so for us, we were like, we're going to honor whatever she chooses to call us. I think that we made a lot of mistakes in the beginning because who doesn't and who couldn't when you're uneducated.
Right.
We started calling her mom, Mama with a first name. And she's called her that since and still calls her that. And her mom, I have so much grace and understanding for. Her mom has been fantastic since day one in embracing that, no matter how hard it is. Actually, no matter how insulting it is. She has a past with other children also. And so maybe that's something that she was familiar with. But for us, we were like, listen, this is kind of what we're thinking. We want her to feel like she can be welcome at our house. And we also want you to have the name of Mama because that's important as well. She's still consistently visiting, still consistently in the picture. And so we knew we wanted to honor that. But she did pretty much start calling us mom and dad very quickly, still mixed with the attachment difficulties, especially pertaining to who she found as safe. And, there's that term mommy shopping where if there's someone that feels like a better fit parent, either at a park because they're playing more or at a church where they're more affectionate, whatever it was, even if they just had more space for her at the time, she's going to reach up and grab for them and want to be held by them. And that was really confusing to me until I did a lot more work on trauma, attachment, what this looks like. And then, once you see it, you pray for God to break your heart for what breaks his. And my goodness, does that break his? So you just have a different kind of compassion. You have a different kind of compassion when you start having your heart broken for what breaks the heart of the Father.
Man, isn't that true? You talked about her mom, and what were conversations like? What was the relationship like with her during this time?
So at the beginning, we actually stepped in to support her in any way we could. We aligned her with a rehabilitation facility after her time served where she could go there, where she was able to go. And, we did everything from physically drive to visitation, even though it was out of county, to make sure we were tethered to the phone for her and closely connecting in these conversations. We really encouraged the relationship, and we had so much hope for what it was going to look like. We can call that naive. We can call that faith, honestly. But at the end of the road for us, we knew we had to step in when we started seeing, and by step in, I mean legally, kind of take some type of action. When we saw some habits and patterns repeating that we knew were not going to lead to a safe childhood for this daughter of ours. It was like, I remember praying specifically, Lord, if she doesn't have 16 years of safety in her, then do what you need to do here for the sake of the child.
Wow. So you said this on your blog. You wrote, I've kept her, and you were speaking of Surrey, away from a mother that I feel confident is capable of more. I want this for them. I wanted this for them, but my wanting does not make any day of difference. And so until our wants align, I will keep in care the child left with me to protect. I will do my best to continue on, even when it feels like walking with foot high, water deep steps so exhaustingly tall that it's tough to make any ground. Remembering that as long as my feet stay planted, so long as I move defensively on her behalf, the tide always rolls out and takes me to safer shores. First of all, that's really beautiful.
Thank you.
But how have you held the tension between respecting her as this child's mom and yet living with boundaries?
It is so tough. So tough. Like I said before, I'm actually thankful because her biological mother is not related to us. We're related through her father. And so there's, in a certain way, a little bit different freedom, even though it's not full freedom, to make the choices that we can on her behalf. But what really struck me as the messiest part on my end is when I had to start deciding who it was I was called to. And am I called to the parent who's an adult who can have a conversation with me, or to the child that is exhibiting behavior that is difficult for me to steward well? But more than that is the vulnerable child. And she can't make her point or her argument or her case clear that I need safety or I need to stay or I need to go back. Whereas her mom is very clear to do so. I think the most heartbreaking thing about it is truly that when you look at these people, and you actually see what Jesus is doing in them, because we saw that work very clearly. She came to know Jesus. She came to follow Jesus. She came to want his will for her life. And yet we still have a lineage of habits and a lifetime supply of familiarities that are going to creep back in. And we all have them. We all have them, but mine look different. Yeah. And we can say that they're quote unquote safer or better for the child, better to raise them with. But that's a judgment at the end of my day. And so me wanting for her to be able to break the cycle, and as much as I was praying for it, it doesn't mean that I can do the hard work for them.
Yes.
I can't do it. And it is heartbreaking to feel like, gosh, I see this in you, or I have seen this in you and I don't see it right now. Or I want to see this in you. And then also stand beside them, whatever that looks like, when they're actually failing those things or falling away from those things. Boundaries do not come easy. And we started, like I mentioned, we had to start looking at who we were called to and how we were called. And gosh, I wanted it to be that generation that was healed and better. But what if it's this? What if it's this generation instead? And so I'm looking at this child and saying, like, you're a chain breaker. And I'm going to allow that. God picked you out of a situation to be different from here forward, not because anything they did was wrong, but because there's trauma and hurt that's stacked on top of itself. And we are looking for relief from that.
Yeah. Wow. Who are you called to? That's a big question in this work, because we do care so much. There's so many people to care about, really, and to care for. And it's messy and it's hard. Over time, something occurred that you hoped you would be able to avoid. And that was that you were going to have to actually take legal action and testify against mom in court. Like, first of all, when you realized that this was going to have to be, how did you even feel?
We felt heartbroken. And then also there was a mixture there of guilt, because she had been in our care for over a year at that point. And the realization that we had not actually done anything to put a system in place of checks and balances, to give accountability to a parent. It felt like, I've waited too long. This is probably a mistake. And that's part of the process I would have done initially, if this happened again or happened and looked differently, or if I had education on the front end. But, God in his grace works through all of our mistakes. And so we were able to look at our situation and say, we have done everything we can before we step in on the legal end, which was actually really healing and really healthy for her, because she had other people in her life that had not given that opportunity, given that time, that length of time, that healing, that relationship on the front end. But yes, heartbreaking for sure. Terribly difficult. It's like every fear of confrontation anyone has ever had, and then piled high and stacked above your eyes and just amplified. It's a horrible experience.
Well, let's just dive right into that terrible experience.
Sounds great.
Will you tell us about what court was like?
Sad. It was really sad, because the area of court we're in was not typical standard for foster care. We were in the realm of care. What is it that deals with kinship? We pursued a legal guardianship. And so that is in a side of the court that also does wills, deeds, and trusts.
Oh, interesting.
And so really what we're looking at is, in the same way you would exchange hands for property when someone is passed on or unable, we are looking to designate and exchange hands of a caregiver. And in this side of court, because it's kinship care, and this is the loophole for kinship, we are mostly dealing with directly related relatives who are battling against one another. And when you are a person that knows Jesus, that sits in that room, hearing story after story, because you don't decide when your case is called, story after story of mother against daughter, of, grandparents and a parent that doesn't show, or of, the arguing of someone who's in an unstable situation, but they want their child back, or they want visitation, they want to see their child. It is just like, I found myself sitting there and just like visually laying hands on these people and praying, Lord, fix it. We have people that stormed out and made sure they wouldn't take the elevator together. We were just watching this all day long. And there's this sense of heaviness and hurt that we, didn't want to be a part of. We didn't want our case to feel like that. And at a certain time, at a certain amount of time, there's nothing you can do to really repair things. But we tried at length to be people who positioned ourselves to say, even in front of the judge, listen, we actually don't know if what we're doing is correct. We're following what we think the child needs, and we're basing our decision off of the child's reactions. And so at the end of this, all we can do is say, we are going to have voiced ourselves, and we actually need you to tell us what the rules can look like, what the rules need to look like in order to keep this person safe and to keep this relationship healthy.
Wow. And mom was there, I'm sure, right?
She was, yes.
I mean, how is that when you're speaking this and she's there and you're seeing her? I mean, how is she responding?
She did not have great behavior in court. In fact, it was increasingly worse, probably because of her increasing worry about the situation. We unfortunately had to escalate things all the way to a trial, which is not true in every kinship case. We had the support of her father at this time, and so that made it a little easier on our end. But, you start with the investigation. It's investigating both sides, and they interview you. And then we had a secondary investigation because she was out of county, or they had to investigate a second time for some reason. And then, we went to a family mediation, which is the same thing you do when you get divorced and you're deciding custody arrangements. And so we followed that all the way down, and we actually came up with a workable plan. And at the time I was 7 months pregnant when we decided this plan. And it was a lengthy plan to reunification. It was a year-long process. We were okay, we're going to try and extend this as much as we can, because what we want to see is consistency and healthiness, and that she can keep showing up and she can remain safe, since we knew her personal past and her struggles, and the pattern of repetition, and how long was typical for her to have to go into repeat that pattern.
Interesting.
Or choose to repeat that pattern. And so we were kind of trying to extend things as long as we could to make sure we're making a wise choice on all ends.
Yeah.
And so after that mediation agreement was set in place, we launched into it. And I remember praying, 7 months pregnant, completely irrational, emotionally, I'm sure. I remember praying, Lord, if she doesn't have safety in her for a long length of time, would you let this all fall apart and not let a day of what's written here come to pass? And it wasn't until later when we got into a huge messy situation that I realized that the Lord honored that prayer. And I love when I pray something and then God calls it to mind for me. Like he's like, remember when you prayed that? It's like a little secret whisper. Remember when you prayed that?
Yeah.
I did it for you. Like, be aware, have your eyes open. I did that for you. And so when I realized that, I was like, gosh, this is just not at all the way I would have expected that to be answered. But okay, thank you. I mean, okay. You know, that's what these human messy situations look like, is answered prayer is still messy. And we don't get to pick it tied up in a pretty little bow, but it's still answered. So
did that cause you had to have to go back to court?
We did. We went 2 more times after that. And, you know, understandably, she's frustrated and she's not her best self, and her behavior is starting to get more and more uncertain, unpredictable. And when our court case ended, she was just so upset and so hurt that she made terrible mistakes in front of a courthouse and a judge and all the people that are there. And I've never once feared for the safety of myself, my child, my husband, nothing like that. I've never feared for that. It just, again, leads you to be someone that is so heartbroken before the Lord on their behalf, because I'm like, this is just not the way. It's not the way for you. It's not the way for us. And we've had interactions since then, even though things have been tense and they've ended tensely. There's nothing in us that want to keep a biological child from her mom for the rest of her life, or not talk about her. We actually very much invite the conversation in our home. We love to celebrate her and speak high of her, because at some point, this child is going to pursue a relationship with biology, whether I approve it or deem the timing worthy or not. And I am going to stand on which side of it. Am I going to be for my child, or am I going to be the one fighting against her? I don't have the heart to be against her. She's already had enough against her. So, you know, there might be disappointment that comes with that someday. And I need her to know that she can come cry on my couch.
Yeah. That's so important.
Yeah.
How do you navigate this call to advocate on your child's behalf? What submission to God looks like when there is a court system involved and you don't have a lot of control?
It is the absolute definition of surrender. Every single thing that we were dragged into, we did not want to do. So I was talking with our pastor's wife before we went into trial, and she gave me the song Defender to play. And she said, this is your battle cry, that he is going to defend better than you can. And I was like, oh my goodness. This is going to have to be what I cling to when we remember how much more he loves them than we love them, or, you know, than we love the situation, or we love the control or the power. We truly are able to surrender. And we didn't know what advocacy really looked like before we stepped into those things. And I continued to feel compelled to just stand in front of the judge and be honest about everything that I was experiencing. Again, I don't know that I'm doing this right. I'm just hoping that I'm protecting the child in the way that I'm called to. And, you know, the court cases, usually you're supposed to be assigned one judge. It was like we had every loophole in the book. We saw all 5 judges in that side of court. We even saw a fill-in judge from a different sector of the court. It was like we had to re-explain the story and start from scratch every single time.
Oh man,
and it was
exhausting.
Like, yes, it's exhausting and it's frustrating, because what you want is for someone to have seen the previous behavior and say, oh, we remember this, we're not going to allow it. Or we remember this and this is looking even more escalated. And it just didn't happen for us. It didn't happen. And so we were truly people that had to be sent to our knees to protect and pray and say, God, if you are going to be the great advocate, you know, I think that's one of the names of the Holy Spirit, is the great advocate. I have to trust you're going to keep doing that. You're going to do it every time, even though it's not the same judge, even though we had to hire a lawyer when we didn't want to, even though, you know, she's showing up again and she's bringing witnesses and she's interjecting against us and defaming our character. It doesn't matter, because you are the great advocate and you know what plans you have for her. And we just have to trust that.
I think it's such a posture of humility, and it's like advocating for this child for protection, and yet with open hands. I think it's so beautiful, because it's just too easy to want to, we get stuck in what we think is best. And even with good intentions, but we get this posture of fighting against people. And I think what you did was you lifted up what you heard and were seeing and the concerns, and yet you did it with such love. I think that's beautiful.
Thank you. We truly tried. And I am a person that is okay admitting my mistakes. I know that I had to catch up on the job. I was already on the job. Here's my son. While I had to catch up, I was already at work, and I had to just get all the education while she was in my care. It wasn't like we were certified and had to get the education before they placed a child. We were like, oh, okay, goodness, we're going to do this. But the more education I got, the more I felt like, okay, I can actually stand up under this choice and say, this is a holy choice. It's a hard choice, and I don't want to do it, but this is probably the way to go in order to give stability to a person that, in order for their health in the future, probably needs this stability right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So, Amanda, what have you learned about yourself through this journey?
You learn what you're capable of. I think that every young adult, especially maybe growing up in the church, maybe not, maybe just in general, struggles with confrontation or struggles with making the hard, good choice. And I had to learn what it looked like to sit in my own living room. She was invited into our home several times, and say, this is what we think we're seeing. And so we need to either see different or tweak it or be different, or we won't allow it even. And that's really difficult because I wasn't parenting an adult at the time. I'm parenting very small children. So sitting with an adult and then allowing their reaction, really tough. But she has a right to her emotions. She has a right to her feelings of even betrayal from us because we felt like we had to step in. She has a right to the sadness and the grief and the mourning of history repeating itself in her own life, or all the fears maybe coming true in her own life, all of her worries ending up as a yes. There is so much loss of control that we were a part of on both ends. Because, inviting a child to your home, it gives you a lack of control also. I could not control a day of my daughter's trauma and choices and way she processed her hurt or way she took out her hurt. We're still dealing with that. And it'll be lifelong, where I look at her and I say, honey, this is likely because of here, and here in your life. We're going to speak into these parts. And I want you to know going forward, you might have different struggles. So I've learned so much. I've learned a tenderness and a gentleness in my parenting. I've learned to hold my kids very loosely in a different way. And God actually walked us through a situation with our biological daughter shortly after this court stuff that made us hold their physical life in an even looser way. It's like I'm being called to be like wrung out like a sponge. I've always said I grew up in the church, and so I was a very lazy Christian until I hit 30, and then God put everything to use. I could use a break from the use, Lord. But it's such a good thing to have all that stored up and to know, oh goodness, he actually is who he says he is. And he does what he says he'll do. So if I trust that he has started a good work in her or in me or in her mother, then he says he's going to be faithful to complete that good work. And I don't have to be involved to know that that's true about him or about her. Yeah. And that's a hard thing too, because I can't be every piece of the story, even in her mother's life. Yeah. Maybe my call is to the child and my burden is to pray for her mother and her father and her biology. But I don't get to be the one that, as the illusion goes, plants the seed, tends the soil, waters the seed, sees the sprout and watches it, grow up and become a fruiting tree. Right. I want that. I'm not allowed to expect it. That's a privilege. It's a privilege when you get to see that in people's lives. And so I just have to trust that the work we did at the time, at the beginning, cultivated the soil and planted the seed, and that someone else, and maybe even potentially my daughter Suri, gets to reap the benefit someday when there's a tree and there's fruit. Yeah. He's going to be faithful.
Yeah. And you mentioned the good, hard choice. And a lot of times that looks like the pruning piece. Yes. And that's a really hard place to be, is to be the one who prunes, but not the one who gets to see the fruit.
Yes.
Because that's
not
painful.
well accepted. Yes.
No. Wow.
I'm sure I wouldn't accept it well from another person either.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't, but the eyes to see it is a heavy thing.
Yes. Has this moved into, I know you had pursued legal guardianship, and then when things kind of went worse, has it actually moved into adoption, or has it stayed with legal guardianship, or kind of where's that at?
We are in a legal guardianship. We have not pursued adoption. It's something that's on our hearts that I think at the right time we'll pursue. But, you know, when you're not in the system, there's no one that's stamping the paperwork to say, okay, now we're going to terminate rights.
Right.
And the idea that I would take it upon myself to do that just feels like, you know, I'm weighing the weight of it on both ends. Do I need to do this for my daughter? Or do I need to do this? You know, do I need to do this to her? Do I need to do this to her mother?
Yeah, that's heavy.
We're not sure yet. Yeah, we're not sure yet. It's heavy. And I want to have wisdom in it. And I don't want to delay forever if it is the right thing. But it's okay for us to take this season and say, okay, now we're slowed down and we're rational. And I actually want to involve my little girl in the decision because what I don't want it to feel like is that it's happening to her or it's being stripped away from her. Yeah. So if this is part of her culture and her identity and her family, you know, she knows she came to our family. Like I said, we talk about her biology often and we refer to them and we draw them pictures and we draw pictures of them and we look at pictures of them. And so we want to feel like, I never want her to feel like a guest. I never want her to feel like she can't be fully part of ours. But what I don't want to do is start ripping things away from her that might feel very precious and valuable.
Yeah, man, that seems very, very wise. And that's a great distinction. So legal guardianship, there can be multiple people. So mom is still, does that mean mom is still legal guardian as well? And you are? How does that work?
Mom is still primary parent, but we are legal guardian, which means we make the choices.
Okay.
And at this point, if there was a desire to transfer care back to mom, her mom would have to go to the courthouse and do the same exact process we did in return. So have the investigation, prove all the things, stand in front of a judge, tell them why, and then the hope is that they look for the best interest of the child and say, okay, well, she's been here for 4 years.
Yeah.
Is it in the best interest of the child to move on, to figure that out? And you know, of course, our hope is to say, no, she gets to stay here forever. And then we get to tether the two together, but we're just not sure. It's not permanent in that way, though it's renewable until she's 18.
Okay. Very interesting. And so you are the primary caregiver, obviously, and decision maker as legal guardian.
Yes.
Okay. We talked about what you've learned about yourself, and you talked a little bit about what you learned about God too, but expand on that. What have you learned about God through this journey?
I would say, and this has been the journey of my adult faith in general, these situations are where the rubber meets the road for us as believers. Is he going to be who he says? So for me, it was truly learning how to trust him and what that looks like as an adult. I went through experiences, you know, when I was younger that feel so flimsy now in comparison, but you start to kind of build up like what it looks like to be disappointed in the Lord's decisions or taking hurt personally instead of seeing it as something that can grow you forward, or even saying, well, this is going to grow me forward, but I kind of resent how that happened. And unpacking that place and just deciding to trust in his character anyway. Like, what does it mean when he says he's going to be faithful? What does it mean when it says that he is good and kind and that he wants us to be servant-hearted? What does that actually look like? Oh, well, it looks like depending on someone above you to teach you how to do it. Or looking at the example of Jesus and saying, can I do that? You know, if we start reading between the lines of, you know, the woman at the well who's a Samaritan woman, which is like, you know, someone that no one wanted to interact with. And here he sits down as a man and he's talking to her and she's alone, probably because she's ostracized from the community. And so we start to unpack the layers of that. And then we apply it to our situation. And we're like, where is Jesus meeting me as the one that's ostracized? Or where am I meant to be a representative of Jesus to the ostracized? Because I could tell you so many times you want to crawl out of your skin and escape from the situations you're put in. And he sits down at the well to be with her.
That's right.
So how am I sitting down at the well to be with the people that I want to get away from because not necessarily they're not good enough, but I'm uncomfortable around them, or society is uncomfortable around them? It is a heavy load.
Yeah.
But I've learned so much more about how God wants me to represent him, like me personally, not the greater church necessarily, or not my next door neighbor, or not even my husband. It's like, this is my calling. And he uses all the parts and pieces of what he put into us on purpose to do that. Like, what is my gifting and how is it coming out right here, right now, with this birth mother, with my child? You know, what am I doing to steward this?
Yeah.
It's all part of it.
It's all part of it. It's good stuff. As we close out here, Amanda, you have already, I'm just eating up everything you're saying, by the way. You have such a wealth of wisdom, and it's come from experience. It's come from living the hard but good. I think I just like that juxtaposition, the hard but good. But what encouragement do you have for others? Because many of our listeners are walking unknown journeys also, with little to no control. So what encouragement do you have for us?
Honestly, the best thing you can do is just carve out a community that's going to walk you step by step towards Jesus, because we keep thinking we have control of the other areas of our life, even if it's no control in this one area, right? We're like, oh, well, the only area that's like the question mark is foster care, or is this foster child? And it's just so not the truth. It couldn't be further from the truth. We keep clinging to the days of our lives, just expecting that we'll wake up in the morning, or just expecting that we're going to have food on the table, or, you know, a roof on our house. And truly, our life depends on what God says yes and no to. And that's a humbling place to be. But if we can find a community where when it's hard, they listen to us and they let us complain, and then they lead us closer to him. That is the most beneficial thing for anyone. I had so many times where I was, you know, speaking to a woman from church, or I actually had started like a play date group for families in foster care, because I thought, I know I need this. I need people who are going to be in my corner. And there's venting, and sharing similar stories, and stuff we can laugh about. And then there's the times where you're just like, this is where we rely on him and his presence to do the work we can't do. Or, you know, this child is transitioning back to their home. Okay, we trust that their time in our home was effective and that they won't forget it. Because he's, you know, we trust that God's storing up treasure there.
Right.
And so the best thing we can do is be people who find people. You know, I kind of always liken it to considering ourselves worthy to have someone who we're pulling up to our level, and someone we're reaching towards to pull up to their level. Like we need someone above us, and we actually need someone below us too. We need someone we're offering counsel to, because again, this plays into the gifting. It plays into our experience. If you've been doing this for a month, guess what? There's someone that hasn't done it yet. They need you.
That's right.
So
I love that you said, listen, let us complain, but then lead us closer to Jesus. Too often we end with the let us complain.
Yes.
You know, and that's an important part, but let's not stop there. We need to be led closer to Jesus and lead others closer to Jesus. That's where the hope is. That's
right.
Well, thank you so very much for being on the show today, you and your sweet son. Thank you so much for being with us, Amanda. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. I loved being here, and I love sharing our story. It's part of the experience, and it's I think it's helpful for everyone, even me, to remember all that God has done.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope today's episode was an encouragement to you wherever you are on this foster care journey. Now, we want you to stay connected, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Also, we have a ton of great content for you over at theforgotteninitiative.org. Thank you for watching, and I can't wait to see you next time.